And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you for joining us for a unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us, for helping us grow. We just hit 1,678 subscribers, and we grow every day because of people like you. So remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. We love it when our audience likes and shares videos. It helps us to grow. Also, remember you can chat in questions of our guests and make sure you comment as the show goes on. I love it when the audience jumps in. It's really cool. To see our past 200 and almost 50 episodes, check us out on our website at www.jasontramm.net. Again, that's www.jasontramm.net. We have a wonderful band for you today. We've got Ian Tomelli, a.k.a. Johnny X of Voices of Addiction. The Voices of Addiction are a politically charged and socially conscious Chicago punk-based rock band. They've been around for over a decade, and they've done over 1,200 shows across the U.S. and Canada. They have 6 official album releases and independently selling over 7,000 physical copies, as well as being involved in countless compilations and digital sales. This band has proven to be a force to reckon with. They've been featured in the video games Skateboard Party 1, 2, and 3, as well as Snowboard Party 1 and 2. They've also, in 2018, had a feature-length documentary about them as well. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How are things in Chicago today?
It's actually not too bad. We got a little warm up coming this week, so that's nice. Probably our last taste of that for a while. It tends to get cold very fast these days. Plus, I don't even think fall exists anymore. It goes straight from late summer into early winter, in my opinion.
Yeah, we actually had a couple snowflakes in New York today. It was like, oh, hello. It was really warm a week ago, and now it's winter is upon us. So what are you going to do? I'm sure Chicago, it comes faster, though.
Yeah, it seems to come a little bit faster every year, I feel like. But then again, last year I didn't think it was bad, and I remember commenting how it wasn't really much of a winter in like mid-January, and then everything changed. So you just never know. You get used to it, though.
So did you always know you wanted to be a rocker?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, from a young age, music was always kind of pushed on me and was around. All my siblings played music, at least for a little bit at first, you know. Started on piano, then orchestra. I started playing electric bass at the end of orchestra, and ultimately I left orchestra to focus on bass. Once I started, you know, getting into more rock bands, Primus was coming out and stuff like that, where bass was more of a forefront instrument more than just the rhythm hitting straight quarters. You know?
I just saw Primus. They just toured around playing the Rush album. They did the Farewell to Kings. I took my 23-year-old and my 17-year-old, and we had a great time. I'd known Primus over the years, but I'd never seen them live, and I'm like, man, what a great show those guys put on.
I've definitely heard some of those songs, but I did not see that tour. But I have seen them a whole bunch of times over the years, and they're always solid. I mean,
what a show!
He's just so on not only his playing, but like his whole approach to the instrument and music in general is just very unique. And it's kind of funny because I don't necessarily play like Les all that much. Like especially in Voice of Addiction, I play with the pick. I don't in other things, but it was just more of how he approached the instrument that was like such inspiration, influence on me. You know what I mean? Because I'd never seen anybody play a bass like that at the time. You know, I was listening to punk bands and other things, and then all of a sudden this larger than life character comes out of nowhere with a mohawk and he's slapping a bass, and I'm like, what is this?
I just think he auditioned for Metallica. What would that have been like?
Oh, it wouldn't have lasted. There's so many egos in that band already. There's no way. And not that, you know, I've heard some things about Les, never to the degree of the egos of the members of Metallica, but there's no way it would have worked out. It's just too many different unique people for that to work out.
So you have a background in orchestra. I'm an orchestra conductor by trade. That's what I do. And I love having these cross-genre conversations. I'm a huge rock fan. I've been involved in rock. I love rock, and just a huge fan. And I love to have these conversations. So what did your orchestra playing bring with you that you take with you when you do your rock?
That's a very good question. By the way, viola is my instrument because my sister, who was a grade above me, played violin. So I couldn't play the same thing as her. Not that I necessarily wanted to play violin. I just wanted to play something. You know, I didn't know what I was doing back then. I guess just it's So I did play piano before that, but I was really young when I played piano, so I don't remember much. But it's definitely when I started honing reading music, and definitely like keeping a solid practice routine, like doing your half hour every day at least, and just taking it a lot more seriously. And then once I got into electric bass, I think that really helped me because I was absolutely horrendous for a good year and a half, I think. I even remember my parents buying me a little like Walkman headphone amplifier so they didn't have to hear me anymore. That's not how they phrased it back then, but looking back on it, you realize some things. But I was absolutely terrible. Like I could not figure out because when I first started playing bass, I wanted to learn with a pick because the bass players I liked at the time played with a pick, and I just couldn't get it down. It just made no sense to me going from this to this. It was a whole different world. So that it was a big learning curve, but I feel like the dedication to practice that I got from those years in orchestra definitely helped push me to be like, if you keep at this, eventually you'll be good enough. But I didn't know I was bad at the time. Let me be honest.
Gotta grow, man. That's the thing about being an artist. I love Sting made a great comment about that. He was talking. I was like, you do it every night. You may as well get good at it, right?
Mm-hmm. You can always be better, no matter what you're doing. I feel like you've never absolutely mastered anything.
That's the truth with music. Who it was? I guess it was. Pablo Casals, who was in his 90s. Like, why do you practice every day? Most famous cello player ever. And he's like, because I'm getting better.
Finally getting good at it. I have heard that one.
It's a good one. It's a good one. It's a good for everybody. I mean, because I'm 46 and I've been doing music for forever, and I'm still working on it. I still feel like I have a lot to say, and I haven't gotten there yet. You're always working towards that goal.
Oh, I hear you. I'm constantly guilting myself over not doing enough personal practice these days because as life just gets busier, and also in the pandemic when there's no gigs or anything, especially last year, it didn't really give me a lot of motivation on personal practice. So it's really just been, I feel like, since the summer, I've been getting full time into getting everything going again and hoping because
there's only so much Netflix we can binge, right, before we start get back
right.
to the music.
And I can't complain. I was very lucky because I had some savings and my better half had a salary throughout the pandemic. So, we were a lot better than most. Not much I can complain about. But I will admit that I have watched some things on Netflix I never would have watched if it wasn't a pandemic. You definitely lower your standards just a little bit. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So I'm excited that now these days it's feeling more like there's actually things I want to watch because I don't have time to watch very much again. So that's a good thing.
So when you got into music, what was your first band, and was punk music always around? Like, what made you decide you wanted to go into that genre?
Yes, for me, it kind of always was around. I'm a middle child. I had 6 siblings, so 3 older, 3 younger, and all my older siblings were into punk rock, and all the way up to 12 years older than me. So, like all the mainstays, the big names, I started getting dubbed cassettes when I was like super young of them, and just kind of fell in love with it. And then, you start reading it was all cassettes back then. When you get a new cassette, you read the lyrics, and reading some of the more political bands like really got me interested, not necessarily just in politics, but just in all types of things like that. So I started visiting the library more, researching things that they're talking about, especially in the old Dead Kennedys albums. I'm like, what is this reference? And then, you start looking stuff up, and I don't know. So that kind of got me on that path. So punk rock was always in the background. My dad was a big music lover, listened to all types of music, and even things that were kind of, he might have even been a little too old for, like Talking Heads and Devo and whatnot, but very eclectic taste, opera, classical as well. So I was listening to that all growing up. So I had that as a backbone. And then you fast forward a few years, and I'm getting, to the end of my teenage years. I ended up moving to Chicago when I was 21, right after my 21st birthday, to start music college here at Columbia. And at that time, I honestly wasn't listening to almost any contemporary punk that was out, mainly just the stuff I grew up on, and kind of thinking there's not much left to be said in the genre, because that was 2002 I moved here. So it was all pop punk and Blink 182 around that time, not really stuff that I felt like I bonded with at all. But then, as I'm getting to the end of my music college career, I started getting more and more back to my roots. because when Voice of Addiction started jamming together, it was just three music college kids doing it in their spare time between work and school. So we were all over the place. We'd have a funk part in a song, and then a metal part, then rock and punk. We didn't really know what we were doing. It wasn't until after the first album in the mid 2000s, I'd say 2006, that we started really getting our groove and finding our voice. Because finding your voice is extremely hard. You know, that's what you do when you start playing. You start mimicking all your heroes. But
Absolutely.
actually finding an original voice in that is not necessarily hard, and it took us a minute, just like most people. But yeah, ever since then, like I just kept pushing more and more towards my roots, and then I'm finding all these bands all over that are amazing. That had no idea were out there. I just had to look. I just stopped looking. That was the only issue.
One of my favorite things has been, we've this Music Matters. We do half classical, half contemporary. We've had rock, indie artists, and excuse me, we've got to deal with Reverb Nation. And I found your music through Reverb Nation. I'm just amazed by how you guys have a great sound. And I really enjoy your political messages and what you're saying through your music. It just made a lot of sense to me. I was just very impressed by what you guys are doing, and I think there's a great indie scene, especially in the punk world these days.
Yeah, it's definitely made a bit of a revival these last few years. And as you know, music festivals were never bigger than right before the pandemic. And the last year was supposed to be even bigger. And the same's true in the punk genre. You got Riot Fest, which is enormous, and that's, strictly punk and on the fringes of punk genres. And, you got big ones like Pooza Fest and Fest in Florida and other things, Punk Rock Bowling in Vegas. So there's all these major festivals around the country now. And it's like, that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. You had Warped Tour, and that was about it. And, at the end there, it had been quite a few years since a proper punk band played Warped Tour anyways. It's pretty much just more of the commercial pop punk sound, because that's what was selling at the time. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely had a few resurgences, when it initially came out, then in the early and mid 90s, and I feel like it happened again in like the mid 2010s. And it's been kind of cool to be a part of it, and I try to put on as many shows even when I'm not playing here as well, just to kind of be involved as much as possible. It's like, it's an addiction, man. I just can't give it up.
So tell us about the name of the band. How'd you come up with it? When did that take root? And tell us where it came from.
So when we first started jamming and whatever else, we were just having fun. We weren't taking it too seriously. We picked a stupid name, and it was like a million bands with it out there. I know you're going to ask me. It was Niche or Niche.
Okay.
Absolutely terrible, but we were young. So we knew we had to change it.
We're Niche. Good night. Yeah, not so great.
We spent like months like trying to think of it and go over ideas. I'll be honest, I've never been the best at naming a band. And then about 3 months after we knew we needed a name change, the guitar player at the time came up to me. And we had a song in our set, which never got recorded somehow, but it was called The Voice of Addiction. And he was like, how about Voice of Addiction? And I just sat there and thought about it. I'm like, that's actually amazing. The reason I liked it is we're definitely not a straight edge band or anything like that, even though there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all about personal choice and autonomy and whatever else. But I feel like, especially in today's modern world, we're all addicted to something or many things. It doesn't have to be the usual suspects like, drugs, sex, rock and roll, etc. It could just be, having a soda pop or going to church or really whatever your thing is. We're all addicted to all types of, just money, or really just anything. We all have our little things, and some aren't as sinister as others. You might have a collection of Star Wars figurines or something, and that's not hurting anybody, and that's just fine. But I'm just, back to something you said earlier. I decided early on with this band that if I was going to sing and people were going to listen to me, that I should have something more to say than just cars, girls, and bubblegum. Like something with substance. But at the same time, I don't want to be overbearing and preachy to anybody and telling them what to think. So I try to walk a careful tightrope of like bringing things onto a table of discussion, but not necessarily telling anybody what to do and letting them form their own opinion, and if they want to look into it more or whatever else. So it's kind of, my way of trying to identify with as many people as possible by keeping it more vague and broad spectrum. So they can.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of indie singer-songwriters that, if they put so much of themselves, like a lot of them start out by putting everything personal in their music and making it so autobiographical, but then most of them wind up, the ones who have really substantial careers, wind up going away from that a bit because it becomes prescriptive. People, when it's a sad song, people put themselves in that, right? I mean, it's like you want it to be applicable to anybody at any time and kind of give them that kind of, they can put themselves in your music.
I kind of liken it to like reading a good book because we both could read the same book, and I feel like as long as we enjoy it to a certain point, we might take away slightly different things and interpret it in slightly different ways. So I kind of feel it's like the same thing with a good song. A good song isn't just going to be one dimensional and hit you over the head. It's going to have metaphors and other things. So I like to use a lot of personal metaphors in my personal life for bigger things, like the world around me, etc. It's a personal favorite of mine, and I do like that. I like when people can identify with it and kind of pull some things that maybe I didn't even see at first out of it. So it's always interesting, and just trying to be better at writing and stuff like that.
How does the songwriting process work for the band? Does one person bring the material? Does one person write the lyrics, or is it by committee?
It usually starts with, even though I play bass in the band, it usually starts with me coming up with the basic skeleton on an acoustic guitar and the lyrics and melody. Where it goes from there can be anywhere. We always like to, in rehearsals, go by there's no wrong ideas. We'll try everything at least once, but after we try it once, we can say it sucks and never do it again. You know what I mean? So it takes very different things. We try different things. We start adding harmonies and other vocal lines and other parts and whatever. But usually, like, the general-ish verse and chorus is there. You know what I mean? And it's, like I said, a skeleton's probably the best way to put it. Sometimes they'll help me with it on this current full length that we're about to come out with. It's currently being mixed. There were 4 songs I wrote with the drummer, and it was kind of like coming up with riffs and going off each other and building the skeleton together, and then we finished it. So it's kind of just whoever has the idea brings it forward. I just usually end up being antsy and bringing the ideas first.
Now, do you write the lyrics, or who writes the lyrics in the band?
I write the lyrics.
Okay, because very important, because when you focus on the topical and the controversial and political, that's a big part of it. Do the lyrics come first, or the music comes first, or does it depend on the song?
It always depends, because you never know when inspiration will hit. Like, even back in music college, I always carry a little pocket notebook with me and pen, because you never know when something will hit. And it could be
you and Beethoven are in agreement there.
Yeah, well, Columbia did the whole classical program, so I guarantee I picked it up from somewhere along similar lines. But it could be just something topical, just an idea or a topic of discussion, or a metaphor or something else, or it could be a simple melody or whatever. And I write it down so I don't forget it, because it's the worst when you forget it. I've been in bands where you'll be at practice, you'll work on a song, and then maybe you got a bunch of shows coming up or other things, so it gets back shelved, and then when you come back to it, no one quite remembers it. And it's like, now it's so easy to record demos and everything else. It's not as big of a deal, but in the past, that has happened a bunch. But yeah, it usually starts with just the acoustic guitar, and sometimes I write the whole thing in 15 minutes. Sometimes you sit on a part for a year and a half. And then something just ties it together that you just, like, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that would go with this part that I've been looking for something to fit with forever. So you're never really too sure. When the inspiration hits, it hits,
When the muse strikes, right? That's fantastic. So your live performance, you guys tour all over you had a very, very busy schedule, over 1,200 shows. I'm sure it's more than that. I'm sure that's an old Spotify bio for you guys. So
a little bit.
How important is the live performance aspect on your music that before you record it? Do you tour your record music before you go on tour, or the opposite?
It's always good to workshop if you can on the road and at live shows. It's the same reason when you see a comedy special, they usually did a whole tour with all that material and then narrow it down. We don't quite do it to that point. The songs are already done. What we'll usually do is, if we have a tour coming up before a recording or something like that, we'll switch off and throw like a couple new ones every night. and just switch off which ones they are so they all get some rotations and whatever else, because the people want to hear what they know. Unfortunately, that's how it is with everyone. They want to hear the hits or whatever else. So as much as a performer you always want to play the new stuff, you still got to play the songs.
The stuff that brought you there, right?
Right. So even when we go out on this album, it'll probably be half and half old songs and then half new songs. We'll probably rotate it as well. But yeah, we usually do like 100-ish shows a year. That usually consists of 3-month-long tours. Because the way I figure it, we're very lucky being in Chicago because we're kind of in the middle-ish of the country. So we can do it in 3 different loops. We got the West Coast tour, which you just follow the northern border, then go down to the southern border and shoot up through Colorado and back. The southern one, which is Texas to Florida and back, and then the East Coast, which is Detroit through all of Eastern Canada, then down through Maine and the whole East Coast to DC, Virginia. So a lot of trial and error showed us that we could do these routes. So a band from the coast, New York or LA or San Francisco, might have to go out for 2 months to hit everything, or we can divide it up like that. And it helps a little bit, for work in between touring and everything else. Because, no one's getting rich playing punk rock for the most part, unless you're Green Day or Blink-182 or something like that. But, for most of us, we have day jobs and side jobs and everything else. So
it's always been that way in the music business. You support your passion, but get on the road. And for you personally, do you feel more comfortable in the studio or on the stage?
On the stage, for sure. Don't get me wrong. I love coming out with new material. And, a studio can be fun, although a bit tedious for my liking. My ADHD doesn't love it. But that's the thing, is when you're in the studio, it's a long process. And it doesn't really get in anybody's ears unless you want to give them a sneak peek for quite a bit of time. Whereas the live, you have that instant, interaction with audience and stage, which is just so gratifying. There's nothing that makes up for that, the crowd feel, and when the best shows are when everybody's moving together and everyone's participating together, which is one of the reasons we haven't gotten back to shows quite yet. It's because I don't like to put a line between the performer and the audience. I like to blur that line. I like to jump into the audience and other things that I just don't know how I feel about that right now. And I don't want to go out there and do a, half-ass show or anything, you know what I mean? So that's been something that's been on my mind a lot. I often describe touring and playing live as my form of therapy. For better or worse, that is definitely true. And I never feel happier and more full and more humble than at the end of a tour when I first get back from a tour. Because it's just so hard to get lost in the distortion and noise these days with social media and everything else. And you only hear the loudest people in the room. So it seems like everybody's just terrible. But then you go out on the road
just screaming at each other, right?
Yeah, but then you go out on the road and meet real people and you realize, wow, people are actually very nice for the most part. There's going to be bad apples everywhere, but for the most part, people are actually pretty nice. It's just that's not what we see online.
I always think that music's one of the things that can break down boundaries between rich and poor and different cultures. And on the show we've had people. I've had a huge group of punk artists from Europe. Then it's become this people really love to get to those concerts. The energy is amazing. I got to be honest. I didn't get punk music until I saw it live. I went to a couple of shows when I was in high school and college, and it wasn't until I actually saw the bands and they got me moving. It's like, oh my God, the punk concerts are so much energy, and it's just contagious. Everyone wants to just kind of dig in, and it's something about it. It's just you have to be there live.
Yeah, and a lot of, especially the early punk bands didn't have the best recordings either, so that was part of it. Not that they sounded much better live, but it's, again, that audience participation, moshing, slam dancing, everyone is involved, it feels like. You can't stand still at a punk show. You're going to stand out like a sore thumb. There's always that guy in the back with his arms crossed. You don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. We saw Flogging Molly. What's with my sons? I went there and I'm one of the old guys hanging out there, and I'm like, man, this is great music. They got everyone dancing. I love how all the different bands put their spin on their punk music. What would you say is the spin of Voices of Addiction?
I'm definitely mostly influenced by the mid 80s punk hardcore hybrid.
Cool.
So like the more aggressive and political sounding stuff, as opposed to the more pop punk that came out later in the '90s. Um, our spin, I mean, with like Flogging Molly, they're obviously going
I,
Celtic routes, and we don't really commodify anything quite like that. Even though it can be done really good, Go Go Bordello does it well. Pinata Protest does it well with mariachi. But we kind of blend the earlier styles of punk hardcore and like the '90s melodic skate punk. So even though it's aggressive and bare bones, I really like my harmonies and my melodies, and I try to put all that stuff I learned from music school and everything else and the orchestral playing into my writing. I like to describe my songwriting as a mix of my classical training and my ADHD, because it's like if you're going on tour playing these songs every night, you don't want to be bored playing them either.
has to be something that grabs you, otherwise it would just be a job, you know. And
Yeah, so
if music's a job, you have to quit. Honestly,
you're trying to keep things interesting, but at the same time be memorable and have hooks. You know what I mean?
we all know there's easier ways to make money if you want to just make money. It's like there's something in the music that has to speak to you, otherwise you get very tired of it.
You have to be passionate. It has to be about more than the image that you see on TV. Like you have to actually be passionate about the actual music you're playing, whether it's for only a couple people or a big crowd.
We've had some great stories of bands on the road. What is one of your best experiences that you can remember in all of your vast amount of touring, and one of your worst experiences?
Oh boy, touring is nonstop problem solving. So it every day there's going to be at least a handful of hurdles, and if you're not all working together and good at problem solving, the tour probably isn't going to work out too well. You're either going to end up broke or having to call it early. Let's see, this was like just over 10 years ago. We were playing a show in Tucson, and there was 4-band bill. We were third, and we didn't know what was going on because we were on stage. As soon as we get off stage, I run over by the merch, trying to talk to people, see what we can do, etc. And then I see all this commotion on the stage and everything else. And by the time someone tells me what happened, apparently someone ripped a urinal off the wall, and the owner just kicked everybody out of the bar and took the shirt on. First of all, I didn't know that was possible, so I'm guessing they tried to stand on it or something. But that was a very weird experience. An old drummer of ours, we were the next day out at diner type situation, and he didn't tell anybody he didn't have money for his food. So we made him eat a certain number of butter packets in a row to pay for his meal. Just the dumb stuff, because it is a lot of the same routine. Like there isn't a lot of time for anything, let alone enough sleep. You just drive, sleep, and play, and that's it. You get there just in time for load-in. Then you find a place to crash, whatever you're doing with that situation. Have to set an alarm super early and drive all day just to get to the next one. So it's really grueling. So you end up playing these weird little games and messing with each other and stuff like that just to keep it interesting. And I always describe touring, especially when you're doing it more DIY style, it's like a pirate ship. You don't want a mutiny on your hands. So like it's all about morale, and not everybody's going to be 100% every day. So you got to like pick up the slack and pick them up on those days, whether they're hungover or sick or just got some bad news, a family member's sick or passing. And everything happens on a long enough timeline. If you're on the road enough, every single thing will happen while you're on the road. We had a van in 2017 literally blow up in Texas. That was pretty terrifying. We were like pulling our laptops and guitars out of it before it like explodes on us.
Oh my God.
And then trying to find a way to keep the tour going because it was in East Texas around spring break and all the vans were rented like everywhere. But then, you end up playing a town that you've never played before. You haven't played in a very long time, not expecting much, thinking nobody will know you. And then you go there and it's just a great crowd, tons of people there, and they somehow know all your lyrics. And it's just so humbling because you just didn't expect anything. You're like just hoping that, you didn't make a mistake and you make enough for gas money and everything else. And it ends up being one of the better shows of tour. You never know. The shows that on paper look like they're going to be the best sometimes don't turn out all that great. And a show that looks like there's no buzz online at all everyone in town comes out to. It's like it's hard to find a rhyme or reason to all of it. But
That's for sure. I mean, it's not that it's not that dissimilar. You know, I did a lot of classical touring. I would do opera tours, and like I had a night where one of the sets fell in the pit. I had a night where this stuff happens. You know, anything can happen in live performance. That's kind of what's kind of fun about it too. I love the kind of wild energy of being in front of a live audience and kind of live without a net. It kind of keeps it interesting always.
it's like Murphy's Law, right?
I've never heard the one about the urinal, but I've heard lots of other ones.
Oh, we could go on for days, and hopefully a lot of the worst ones I've forgotten about by this point.
How about some of the best one? Where's some of the best best towns that you performed in?
I obviously like Chicago, so I've spent about half my life here by now. I moved here when I was 21. I'm originally from Cleveland, by the way, and
Not too far.
I didn't move. I moved here for school. I didn't move here for the punk scene, but it just happened to help that it's just always been a famous town for their punk scene and their music scene in general as well. You know, home of blues, home of jazz, and all that stuff. But obviously, New York's fun. I have a lot of friends who avoid New York just because of how difficult it is. But we always do, Manhattan and a Brooklyn show. Sometimes we'll throw in something else like Long Island or something else, like that. So we always like doing it. It's mainly just from friends we have from over the years that we know there that make it so awesome. You know what I mean? If you don't know people there and you're just coming into New York, you're going to be in for a big surprise because you'll be lucky just to make back what you pay in parking and tolls.
For sure.
You know what I mean? The SoCal scene, super famous for punk rock, obviously. I'm personally more of a fan of the Bay Area for punk rock and the Pacific Northwest, Seattle and Portland. I really like Seattle. We always do too many shows in Washington State just because I really like the state and the people.
It's gorgeous, yeah.
And it's also because we just drove from Chicago to Washington State along the border. So it's long drives through the Dakotas and Montana. So once you get to, the coast, you're pretty psyched and just want to have a couple days to not drive all day. Texas treats us very well. It's really odd because I avoided Texas for the longest time. I didn't play Texas until 2011. It was one of the last places in the States I played. And, the cities are great. They all have great scenes, and there's a lot of cities there. So, I don't really stop in between the cities. But we always have a great time down there as well. So those would probably be the main areas. But that's the cool thing about doing this for a long time. Every time you play somewhere, you meet new people and you reconnect with people that you've met over the years of going there. So it makes it like every time you go through these cities after you've repeated them long enough, it's almost like a mini reunion of all these people that you get to see like once a year or maybe even more than once a year, depending how far away it is. And that's always been really cool to me. That sense of community and everything else has been like my favorite part.
That's awesome. You get to build you build your reputation on the road.
Yeah.
You build reputation out there. And how important is the merchandising aspect for bands today?
Oh, it's absolutely enormous. I mean, the record label industry isn't anything like it was when I was growing up. I grew up with the thing you get on a label, you're set, that's it. You're golden, even though that wasn't necessarily the truth, that was the myth, that's what everybody said. And it's just not the cases anymore. So for a lot of bands, that's how they make all their money on tour, is by selling merchandise. It is what I like best about it on the road, because we always sell more merch when we're touring than when we're not touring, even with online sales. It's just when you're out there, you're being active, you're in front of people's faces, it happens more.
Man, if I see a band I like, I always buy their shirt. I always, got to support these guys because this is the way it is today. It's not the streaming that's going to pay the bills, right?
Well, regardless of what happens with the show, however good or bad it does, or however shady the promoter or venue is, because I can think of at least a handful of times I've chased a promoter down the street. I think I've only had to tackle him twice. Like I said, in a long enough timeline, everything happens. But with merch, that you always are getting your profit from it. So let's say a promoter completely rips you off and you don't get your guarantee. At least that merch money is still yours and you can keep affording to keep it going. And then you tell everybody you don't have to work with that promoter again. And that's a lot of how it happens, is everybody just kind of talks to each other about it. So when there's a bad egg out there that isn't taking care of people, hopefully they only get away with it for a short amount of time and word gets around and people stop going to their shows. But there's always going to be bad eggs like that. I mean, it's notorious, especially for punk promoters, or they just get drunk and disappear before it's time to pay bands out. And it's like,
yeah,
well,
that's
we gotta be in another city tomorrow. We can't wait around for you tomorrow.
horrendous.
Or, well, I'll here's a check, cash it in 3 days. There was one time we had a guarantee, and they paid about 3/4 of it on a check. We had to cash it 3.5 days later, specifically at 9 a.m., not before or after. Like, I had to set an alarm to this and everything. And then I think there was like $30 in change and like $30 in singles. It was super weird. I did not think the check would cash, but it magically did, and I was so amazed. But I mean, what can you do? It's the end of the night. Everyone's getting kicked out. You got to be in another town and hit the road. You can't sit there and argue all night. So, you just learn over time who to work with and who not to work with,
The glamorous side of music that the fans don't see as often.
Yeah, everybody thinks it's backstage and all fun and everything, and that's just such a small part of it. It's basically a grind, and you're just trying to keep going.
Yeah, you get on that stage, it makes it all worth it. It's the same for what I do too. I love the prep work, but it's always the rush of the stage that keeps me going and keeps me young.
That instant gratification, yes, that is my absolute favorite part of playing.
Have you ever played a small club in Chicago called Reggies?
Oh yes.
I got to experience Reggies. My son was on tour with John Anderson playing drums. He's 17, and I flew out there I had to cancel 2 of my rehearsals and have subs, and I flew out there and checked it out, and it's a fun place.
Yeah, they got a good thing going. It's down, I guess it's almost considered South Loop now, but it's right next to Chinatown, which is one of my favorite things about it, because you can just pregame in Chinatown before the show.
I had great noodles. The food was fantastic. Caught the show, flew home.
But yeah, they got a nice little complex there, and that neighborhood was very rough. It was public housing, high rises across the street, and it seemed kind of off that they would open a club there when it first opened, but they stood the test of time and are great. One of the biggest mainstays in the city. They got the 2 main rooms on the first floor, then they got the comedy club upstairs, and then they got their rooftop patio they have music on too, plus their kitchen. They got a lot going on.
Impressive. I met the owners. Those guys were great. It was a lot of fun. I was with a bunch of Yes fans, which is hysterical. I was online. I'm like, yeah, I'm here to see my 17-year-old play drums. And they were like the biggest fan club. They were coming over saying, yeah. Audience loved it. Those John Anderson fans are very, very loyal.
Nice. So I'm glad you had a good time in Chicago. I like to hear that from people.
It's a great town. Great town. For classical music, for rock music. Well... And I didn't know my Chicago very well, so I sight saw. I flew in at crack of dawn, 5 a.m. flight. I did as much sightseeing as I could. I went to the pier. I went to a couple other famous places. Had some deep dish pizza, and I walked all the way from there to Reggies. I'm like, I didn't realize how far, like 3 miles. I'm like, oh boy, it's kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, that'll get you. So I'm impressed that you're from New York and it took you that long to mention pizza.
Different type of pizza, but
Anytime anybody from New York interviews me, it's always like half the conversation. And
but to me, there's no bad pizza. What are you gonna do?
I agree with that too. But the thing you got to realize is nobody who lives in Chicago really, for the most part, eats deep dish. That's tourist food. We do tavern cut, which is barely slightly thicker than what you guys have. It's just cut different for the most part. But
I always say, how can you mess up pizza? Then you go to like down the south. It's like, oh, that's not good.
On the West Coast, the New York area, and for some reason, New Haven, Connecticut, and Chicago is about the only acceptable pizza, other than finding a few hidden gems here and there. In my opinion.
I agree with you. So, you have the album coming out real soon, and do you have plans to get back on the road?
Yes, that is the plan. We're trying to get over this current holiday surge, and we're hoping after New Year's that the trends are looking how all the modeling's saying, and we can get back to booking full time. So that's the plan. The first tour we had to cancel was a May-June tour to Canada and the East Coast. So that's the first one we hope to make up, just because they've been waiting the longest. And not only that, but the tour poster was so amazing that I can't wait to actually use it.
It's like the Buffalo, nothing's wasted, right? You keep that one then.
Yeah, because we do a good like week and a half in Canada, so it's pretty substantial. We love going to Canada; it's so great. Uh, but so we kind of did a whole little spin off of South Park and the Blame Canada thing. So
Awesome.
yeah, really stoked just to get out there in general. You know, I can't believe how long it's been since I've been on stage performing, and I'm not a big fan of the live stream performances. So we were like, oh, we'll save it and we'll do it, in the fall of 2020. And then next thing you knew, the holidays were approaching. We never did it. It just never kind of materialized because we were going to do one. Because my whole thinking was we don't want to keep doing a bunch of them. If we're going to do it, let's do like a good one. You know what I mean?
Get it out there, get it strong, yeah. Well, it's coming, and I can't wait to see what that's going to look like. I can't wait to see when you come to New York, and I'll check your tour schedule. I'll definitely check it out when you're here. It's always good to. I love to hear the bands when I meet the people. I think it's fantastic.
Well, that's what it's all about, is meeting the people. The one good thing about the pandemic has been we were not lazy, and since we were together when it started, we were already in our own bubble together. So we were like the only people we could really see that initial part. So it really enabled us to workshop and write these songs. And like, I really pushed myself with songwriting, and these guys really pushed themselves on their performances and everything else. And, we're really going above and beyond on this one. So we can't wait to share it with people. We got 3 music videos that we're planning to release throughout this next year, and really, really get back to hitting it hard and throwing this album in everyone's face, tearing up stages again.
It's awesome. Where can people go to find out more about the Voices of Addiction and where you're performing?
Our website is voiceofaddiction.com. Pretty easy. We're also on literally every streaming platform and social media thing there is. Just Google Voice of Addiction or put it in the search bar of Facebook, Instagram, and we'll come right up. And we will definitely be keeping people updated as we start doing this, and hopefully we'll be seeing some announcements once we get to mid-late January about some tours coming up.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Music Matters, and keep on rocking, Ian.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. To see our over 250 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontram.net. Again, that's www.jasontram.net. And remember, keep music alive.